Welcome to the June 30th meeting of the Comprehensive Plan Committee. This evening we'll continue our conversations. We've been going on for many months, years at this point, but we'll continue on with our discussions this evening. We do have a couple of sections we want to start to kind of walk through of the new areas we're working on. Talking about some of the business development economic opportunities, and then we've also got sections on agricultural viability. We'll also then get into looking at doing our site tour, scheduling a date for that to look at the areas that we looked at rezonings, and then depending on what time we have, Jim started doing a synopsis of kind of where we are with the rezoning recommendations and kind of creating a chart with that, so just to see where that falls.
We'll talk about that.
So our apologies for not getting the documents or the sections out to you sooner. We will walk through those tonight, so we didn't provide those ahead. With a limited number of people here tonight, obviously we're not making final decisions. We'll have more time for discussion, debate, whatever, so we don't feel like you have to have everything down tonight, but at least we wanted to get through and keep the momentum we had going and keep some of the sections, and we'll look ahead of the next in auditorium meeting. I think we're looking at the end of July that we'll get you the sections ahead of time so you have more time for review and feedback. So with that, I think Doug's got the sections there. Jim's kind of been the key on these couple of sections, so I'll let him kind of run through some of the stuff we're looking at. We can go through headings. Not looking for you guys to read every line, but we'll kind of run through the synopsis of it and then obviously give it to you to go home and take with you.
So as you recall, when we first started this whole process, the intent was really just to kind of update what we had from 2010. And as we got into it, and actually I give Doug a lot of credit, because I think when Zach had it, Zach was under the premise that we were just going to kind of update here and there and kind of tweak a little bit. But as we got in, when he left and it got dumped onto Doug's lap, he started going through it with us, and it became apparent that so much has changed in 10 years. So much has changed in 1 year, but in 10 years, it really didn't warrant just tweaking it here and there. We really had to rewrite a lot of the stuff because it just wasn't even applicable. And with all due respect, a lot of it was like motherhood and apple pie. It didn't give you any recommendation to speak of that would have helped the community in many cases. So we took it upon ourselves to start to kind of rewrite these sections. And we've got two now. We worked on the agricultural component, which really was quite different than 2010 because of what's happening. Obviously, our farmers are aging out right now. There's a couple that are young. The rest of them are all getting ready to retire. A lot of their children don't want to take on the responsibility of farming. So we had to talk a little bit about that and some of the alternatives that we had, or things that we're looking at in the future to try and make farming viable in Penfield or keep it viable. So we want to kind of go through that a little bit. The same was true with the business community. Obviously with Amazon and other internet operations, they've put a lot of pressure on our local merchants to produce and be viable. So we're going to talk a little bit about these things. And some of them are a little controversial, especially with the agricultural. I know Chuck's not here tonight, but I'm sure he'd be interested to see what's going on here. And certainly we'll probably be talking about this again at the next meeting. But we've talked about the fact that it has been our tradition over the years. For the last 200 years, agriculture was everything to the town of Penfield. We still have a viable agricultural district in Penfield. The agricultural markets legislation has changed dramatically over the last several years, dealing with things like cideries, wineries, breweries, microbrews, agritainment, things like you see now what's happening with Wickham Farms, that kind of thing. And it's not just here. You see it all over the place. Every town's got this situation now where farmers have to do other things to bring people to them so that they can remain viable for the purpose of just farming, if nothing else, but they've got to have other activities taking place on the site to draw an income to make it viable to keep farming. So if you go down, you were right there. Let me just see. Go down to today, Penfield's farming community consists of fewer than 10 farmers, many of whom are growing older. In most cases, the town has learned their children are not interested in continuing the family tradition of farming, jeopardizing the continuity of farming as we know it. And the town has been and continues to be supportive of the farming community, which is true, and recognizes the viability of traditional farming of field crops and dairy cannot continue to be successful without the support of emerging operations such as agribusiness, agritainment, which is what you kind of see over at Wickham's and others, and renewable energy production. And that is kind of an interesting situation because renewable energy production could be something like solar fields. If farmers are not going to be able to farm their land for one reason or another, they may be looking to us to sell their land to various companies to put in.
Or lease it out.
Or lease it out.
So
Most
what you
probably
look at
lease it
is
out. That's how they're going to retain
you could
their
lease it out and
property.
have a
And
25-year lease agreement, you could install solar panels, and at the end of 25 years, similar to what we have here, you
And
could
that's-
look at either removing the panels, the land still exists. If someone wanted to farm it, you're not, forever encumbering the land, but at least you have the opportunity that, farmers could
you haven't
generate
built it
an
out with
income.
something that's permanent. So that's something we have to look at over the next several years. That's going to be a big issue for us and other communities. And then in recent years, the Penfield community has embraced support of agriculture, so community-supported agriculture, the CSA programs, member-based patronage. The Penfield Recreation's 3.3-acre organic community victory garden, featuring nearly 100 rental plots and town-owned land on 5 Mile Line Road, and farm-to-table offerings of local ingredients to the restaurant industry. And maybe that's something we look at as well, is maybe create a larger victory garden in the community somewhere so that it's opened up to more residents who may want to do it. I know that's a very popular
I
operation.
believe we have a waiting list. Right
Yeah,
now.
we have a waiting list for it, and I think that that might be something that we'd look at as possibly a recommendation to expand that operation. And we can talk a little bit about the strategies, if you want to just zoom up a little bit. We want to continue to make sure that farmers receive tax benefits for remaining in the ag district. I think that helps them tremendously. There's some things going on in the ag district. It takes 8 years from the time you sign up to the time that you can actually get out without penalties, which is fine. They're all happy with that.
Yeah.
But what happens in a lot of those 8 years is that we have, in some cases, subdivisions that have been developed on their properties, and they have not come off the ag, they're still in the ag district, although they're not getting any benefit for it. As a matter of fact, the developers had to pay back to the district, what was taken out for the farmers in terms of their benefits. So we've got to clean that mapping up a little bit too, and let people know that they're not in an ag district anymore, really, a viable ag district.
Could I sort of
Sure.
just piggyback on something that you were just talking about, Jim, in terms of the community gardens?
Yep.
That one sort of one concept, and I think we've discussed it here, because I know I've at least discussed it with other people in other
Yep.
settings, that addresses a few of the different issues we were talking about in the comprehensive plan in terms of having younger people want to move into Penfield,
Right.
more people, younger people want to get involved in agriculture, is the possibility of some sort of a pilot program where we recruit some younger people from urban environments to work on farms here, but with a kind of a stake in the outcome, not just, kind of day laborers on farms, but something
That would be the
where
only
it's
way
a-
it would work, because at this point in time, if these older farmers are just giving up their land,
Right.
there won't be any activity of any type. But if you have somebody coming in that's working with the intent of possibly becoming maybe a part owner in the future, or, somebody that has a future with that land, that might be the way to handle it, yeah.
But, it's a sort of a collaborative effort that involves education, maybe Cornell Cooperative Extension could,
Right.
be sort of the agent that sort of helps coordinate the efforts. But
Yeah.
something like that where it is a way that we're very good neighbors to our friends in the city, but we also very much help ourselves in the process by adding some kind of new lifeblood and new interest.
Yeah.
To
That's
this
the only way it's
more-
going to work, because, it's apparent that a lot of these farmers' children do not want to do this anymore.
Right.
They've been doing it since they were kids, and they don't want to do it. You've got to bring people in that really want to have a passion for it. And who knows, maybe they have a passion for it when they walk in. It's one thing to take care of a little patch in your backyard, but when you're taking care of hundreds of acres of land, and you've got to know how to use machinery to do it, and they don't know how to do that at this point, there's a lot of training that goes into the process. But that's not to say that it couldn't happen. And certainly, if you're training people to do things they don't know how to do, it gives them one more skill that they didn't have when they met you, so.
I've seen there's other planning efforts around the country that people have built subdivisions around a farm, and the people in the subdivision all have a share stake and
Yeah.
help growing the plants and, maintaining the farm as part of, where you live, so.
I would
think
say
we're-
that
we're
that would
open
be.
up to a lot of different, options or opportunities. Obviously, whatever can help the farmers, remain viable, as long as possible, or, continue on. And that's some of the stuff and the suggestions we've kind of floated out there tonight, and obviously looking for, more input of, what can we do to help, farmers stay viable, keep it, as open as we can.
Yeah, I think your comment would be an excellent strategy or a recommendation.
Thank you.
We could certainly add that. So, going through, we should, continue to work on that event. The town should continue its commitment to maintain drainage ditches, to keep lands viable for farming. That, for a long time, became a problem in Penfield. It started to get resolved. From the 1970s, it did not work well in terms of us cleaning out ditches for farmland. We kind of left it on the farmers, who actually could not do it by themselves because it was so extensive that it was going to cost them more to do that than it would be just to let it go. And in many cases, they did that. We started actually in the 80s to start cleaning out major ditches throughout the community. And that did kind of open up some farmlands that had been kind of gone fallow for a long time. And we've done a good job, I think, over the last 20, 30 years of keeping major ditches open. Things like Commission Ditch, which is being maintained on a regular basis now, which had not been maintained since the 1930s or 40s, before they cleaned it out in the late 80s. So it doesn't sound really important, but it really is to maintain agricultural lands to keep them
And
viable.
as Harold sits on the Watershed Committee, that's something we talk about quite often and look at as areas that, making sure the drainage ways stay open, especially with a lot of the ash trees now. We've got just areas where dead ash trees will fall in the woods. If you're not, we don't regularly walk them, get out and look and see what's going on. It creates a blockage. We have beavers, we have, just normal, degradation over time, things silt in a little bit, so that's something the town board is committed to. We do have a drainage fund dedicated towards, keeping that up, so not only for, the betterment of the community, making sure the homes drain well and the subdivisions, but as Jim had shared, keeping the farmlands, active and viable.
So for I guess you call it agritainment, when you talk about that, are you talking about where they possibly some of like the cider mill type things we've seen crop up and where you can go and buy fruits on the side? I noticed the one up on Creek Street has moved back. They've got parking that's built out now that's much more substantial than what used to be. Is that what you mean generally about that, or
Well,
is it
so
more like?
It's
They're more
more than that, though.
traditional.
It's, well, agri-tainment to
I mean,
me,
that's
it's
a
kind of like, I'll give you an
farm stand
example. There's a group out in Waterloo we just went to visit. It's a big farm out there. It's actually a cheese farm. They make cheese there, and it is tied into Cornell Cooperative Extension. They do a lot of work down at the university, actually. But they own this gigantic farm. They're very viable, but they took an old barn and they created it into a showcase-type barn. And they have music there every Sunday from 2 to 5, and they bring in a couple hundred people. And they don't even charge admission to go, but they do sell food and drink and everything there, and they make a lot of money. And I think a lot of that money goes back into the community. It doesn't, they don't just hold on to it for themselves, but, it's to draw people to a point where they've never been before. They don't know anything about farming, but now you get a chance to see what they're really doing there on a day-to-day basis, or at least a weekly basis. And, a lot of it too is, you think about the bouncy pillow that they had over there on 250, which they now have over on Sweets
It's
Corners.
also the hay
Corners.
rides.
Yeah,
and
it's
things
all
like
of that. It's to
that.
bring
Corn
people
mazes,
to
The corn mazes.
the pumpkin chunking type stuff, just to draw people to it. Because admittedly, when little kids go, I mean, they remember that stuff the rest of their lives, and they start to have a better feel for what's happening with agriculture than they would have, they're going to Seabreeze or someplace, so.
Yeah, so, no, it makes sense, so you're.
So, yeah, the one on Creek Street you're referring to is Sunscape Farms. So we've worked with them. The gentleman that was leasing it now owns the property, so he's done some improvements, moved that off. So we've had farm markets in our code for a number of years, supportive of that. But I think the closest example of agritainment is kind of, as Jim was alluding to, is, Wickham Farms, we're on Sweets Corners Road, where they do, corn mazes, and, they've got apple launchers, and they've got, other stuff over there that gets people out in mostly the fall harvest time, gets kids out, families out. They've got flowers for picking and photographs and other stuff. So they've got other areas that agriculture is changing, as we've seen and discussed many times. It's not the same as it once was of, row crops and just growing corn or soybeans or whatever. It's, wineries, breweries, we've got a cider, a cidery now. They grow the apples on site, create their own cider, locally with that. You've got Wickham Farms, you've got, Bauman's has got their, their farm market with it right there. The U-Pick sections that, gets people back out in the fields. You can go pick your cherries. They're working on building a building across the street. So now you don't have to cross over, Plank Road. That's kind of always been a dangerous area for people to start at shoots. You have little kids and you see them carrying their baskets crossing Plank Road. So they're working on putting a building on the north side so that people can work out of that.
You'd be able to pay and whatnot.
You pay and then you go pick your own berries and pick your own cherries and, get the kids out and understand where it doesn't all just come from Wegmans or Tops or wherever you shop. Understand where your food comes from and your vegetables and crops and everything.
And I
else.
think that sort of educational aspect of it is really critical. So, I mean, it's fun to do for kids to do the bouncy pillows and stuff, but that
kind of brings you in, but then
that
you kind of get
aspect
into.
of children knowing
Yep.
where food comes from, or people learning to value the difference between cherries you pick straight off a tree versus
Right.
ones that had been sitting in a bag at Aldi's for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, picking
And-
strawberries it's a
Yeah.
big deal, you get a chance to get out and actually
And
be
I know
in the field.
And Wickham has
Shoots.
done things like, for instance, they just had lavender days, so they
Yeah.
have an acre of lavender growing, and they offer little classes, on how to make things,
Exactly.
how to use it in culinary applications, how to use it for making your own sort of body products, how to make things for your home with it. Grossman's used to offer little seminars on how to use different produce as it came into season and stuff like that. So I think that if we want an ongoing interest without it being like just going to the movies, but something where people know that there's something not just to do, but some knowledge they can take away.
You're
I
actually
think that makes
interacting.
it that much more valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
I know Shoots, when they did their expansion, they incorporated that, if you've been in there recently, they got all the glass in the back. They wanted to show the apple cider process. So before, it kind of all happened in the back room. You came, you bought your gallon of cider and went on your way. But I know Evan's got an education background, and he was very much wanted to show you can stand there and watch where the apples come in and, see how they get pressed and how that process goes. So we were happy to see that they wanted to incorporate that with their expansion to kind of, again,
And
have that education.
To give you an
effort as part
example,
of that.
Shoot, when I started working here in 1980, Shoots had been here a long time before I got here. But Shoots was considered to be not a farm market because it sold other stuff other than, agricultural products. And as a result, it was considered to be a pre-existing non-conforming use to the zoning district. But obviously, over the years, I mean, that whole industry has evolved now where you need those kinds of things to bring people in. And certainly now they're just considered to be a farm market. And we've changed laws over the years to allow that to occur. We know that those places become iconic in town, and you don't want to lose them. So obviously, you want to make sure that they're as viable as possible, and I think it's worked
Well,
out.
no,
pretty
you got
well.
Christmas tree farms, you got
Yeah.
Woodwards, you've got Bauman's, you've got, so I know the farmers are trying to diversify, and I know, Dave Woodward is planting more trees than he ever has before, and they're trying to spread out their, their crops and everything else, so they're trying to all diversify. The Wilberts, we just met with them recently, they're planning on planting more Christmas trees and expanding, their uses, so it's good
And
to
I
hear
think
that
they-
people are reinvesting and, the farmers are planting other crops and other things, so.
Yeah, the key there is the diversification that you're
Right.
talking about, is not having all the proverbial eggs, so to speak, in one
You guys-
basket.
I mean,
Yeah.
right now, we got quite a situation with rain and things are dry, and if that's your only crop and you get a huge loss, obviously they could, impinge, or we get a late frost, and I know that's,
But years ago, I mean,
it
Shots
impacts the
almost-
apple trees, and all of a sudden, we got a late frost one year, and all the apple
Yeah,
trees
I
were
mean,
done, and,
Shots pretty much lost their whole apple crop the one year that we had the late frost. If it hadn't been for
Yeah.
the rest of the agribusiness, they would have been in serious trouble.
yeah.
I mean, that's what kept them going.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think that we need to consider in terms of the viability of some other small businesses in our town, the collaborations between these, the larger places that have the physical footprint, like Schutz or like Bauman's or like Wilbert's, and the other vendors that they deal with in town, smaller vendors that people they buy honey from to put on their shelves, the
Right.
people they buy jams from to put on their shelves, the collaboration with Schutz and Blue Toad, hard cider
They
company,
got
and
Blue
stuff like
Toad, they
that.
got Pittsford Dairy in there now, they've got some
Right,
other.
Pittsford Dairy's in there now. It kind of, it creates a greater sort of economic viability within the ag sector
Right.
in our immediate town and also in our kind of slightly broader region.
Very true.
Agreed.
So some of the other things we were looking at was making sure that we've done a pretty good job of streamlining the building permit process for farming activities. I think we issue building permits, but we don't charge for.
We
Charge
charge for
fees.
the building permit, but they obviously still needs review, make sure it's, especially if we're bringing people into the
Right.
building. But we've streamlined it that basically they submit an administrative review of a site plan, a building permit.
Yeah, they
they've
don't have to go
taken
to the
some
planning
of the
board.
planning board process out and everything else to
Criteria.
try to keep it a little, more streamlined for the farmers
Yeah.
and keep it.
That seems to have been working. We've worked well with the farmers over the last several years to make sure that happens. But certainly you can always look at it and make sure it's a little bit better and, more efficient for them as well as time goes on. Again, supporting the use of farm markets in town. For a long time, we had 2 or 3. We've had a couple more come in here and there. And the other part of it is that giving outlets to others. Farmers generally don't do things locally. We tried to do a farm market here a couple times. For some reason, it didn't work. A lot of the farmers locally take their stuff down to the public market on Saturdays and Sundays, and I think it's more viable for them because they get a bigger crowd down there. But we have tried to have at least 2 that I'm aware of days when you would have a farm market operation. I think it's just too much effort for them to come down and then not get the crowd that they're looking for and then have to truck everything back home again. So we've tried it. It doesn't mean that we couldn't try it again in the future as you get younger people coming in that are more interested in farm to table. It may work the next time that it didn't work the last time. So that's something to take a look at again. And then, again, we talked about the renewable energy purposes in the sustainability section of the town code, which we're writing now, because I think that's going to be a big thing for farmers as time goes by as to how they can maintain and own their land.
Well, I think that's also some guaranteed revenue and income for them
Right.
if they can get obviously not looking to have all of their land taken over with solar farms, but we know, there's definitely going to be a thought or demand for that. And if that's a guaranteed income for them, every month that they can rent out part of their property, have that,
Right.
come in, obviously helps, continue their viability or get through some of those
Yep.
low times.
And we know solar's coming. The state's moving forward pretty rapidly with their own solar code and leaving municipalities up to essentially either we have to come up with our own code and how we are going to handle the possibility of renewable energy on agricultural properties, or it'll default to the state's code on that. So it's something that our community should really take a look at and see what we can do to make sure that we protect agricultural properties, but that we're also, assisting the farmers in maximizing what they can do with their property. And there are
basically
some
this-
pretty creative solutions with like elevated, solar systems where you can actually grow crops underneath solar panels and things like that.
So has there been some discussions with some of the local farmers to do that? I mean, is it something that you guys have already kind of?
Got a lot of groups, they get advertisements from groups a lot that come around that are looking for it. Basically, we've told them that currently our code doesn't allow it because we're trying to develop it and get it in place. If you want to have solar on your roof, or Donna or Harold, you can have solar that offsets the power of your house or your business. As of yet, we don't allow it to just be a total power generator on its own. We're working on the code, not saying we won't allow it, but as Doug kind of alluded to, the state basically has said we can't deny it. If we don't do anything about it, the state will come in and do it for us. So we're trying to get our code together so we can talk about buffers, talk about, if there's other things that kind of help it fit in, how much of the property can be covered, percentages, different things with it, so we can kind of set some.
We don't want to see every square inch of somebody's
If they
property
consider
covered in solar
reasonable
fields.
parameters, if we have it so overly restrictive, again, the state will come in for some of the bigger ones that went out on Rush and everything else. The state basically come in and said, hey, we're doing this project, here you go, thank you very much, and this is what you get. So we're trying to develop parameters that are reasonable. whether you like solar panels or not, and I'm sure it'll be, controversial if we start seeing them in East Penfield, but
Is it
like
more
many
than
other
just-
things, like
more than just solar, or there's also wind and others? Is it a
we
variety?
are working on it, wind, geothermal, and in our sustainability code. We've not seen the pressure for wind, but again, we want to make sure we're ahead of it. Similar, Jim's been working on 5G. Again, it's something they've put out there, and the government basically says you can't deny it. So if we said we don't want 5G and we don't want all the poles, they'll just kind of come in and do it for you. So we're trying to get our code set up, so at least we've got parameters. If it's reasonable, they'll comply with our code. If we have no code, or we have a code that says we don't allow them in our town, they'll just say thank you very much and then go
Dismiss
on and
you.
do it themselves. So
Yeah, we're actually in
there's some
pretty good
puts and
shape
takes
of
there,
that.
and people say, well, we don't want to see 5G, we don't want to see cell towers. That was a number of years ago. People didn't want cell towers. The FAA or the FCC, excuse me, came in and basically
Both.
said, we're going to do it anyway, whether you like it or not. So those are some of the things we're working on is, okay, well, whether you like it or not, let's at least have code parameters set up. So at least hopefully we've got reasonable guidelines that people comply with. And some may like it, some may not like it, but at least
So it
we
sounds
try
like
to regulate
comprehensively,
ourselves
you're
and-
across across several factors of
Yes.
renewable
So,
energy. that
yeah,
could be-
we'll look
okay.
at wind, we're looking at geothermal, so our sustainability section of the comprehensive plan will discuss all those items, and obviously, we're also, at the same time, we're working on code sections that'll be adopted into the town code as part of it. So this group will look at the sustainability section, we talk about those. If there's other stuff we haven't talked about, there's green light, communications, other stuff that, say that we're supportive of those items, and then we've got to work on the code. Okay, how does it meet those requirements? What's the specs? How far, setbacks? That's all the kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff that we're working on at the same time.
Question, do we already have something in our code, or if not, I think this is probably the time to be thinking about it, the big giant greenhouses that some communities
Yes.
have, because we're talking about alternatives to conventional agriculture.
We
Do we
did
have
talk
something about that?
We did talk about the fact that, I think the wording was, I don't know why it's not in there, we did have it, where the town is going to have to consider the pros and cons of having something like that in the community, especially now where you're not growing tomatoes anymore or lettuce.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With that coming on, that's another law that we have to look at, because if we don't put something into effect, by the end of this year, it defaults to the state, and the state says you're in. And we're not quite sure the entire community wants to be in at this point in time. And there's some things that we have to work out in terms of, safety issues and that kind of thing as it relates to, what you allow
Well,
people to
and
do and don't.
that's for sale of it, but if
But
you're
we
not
did,
in on
yeah.
the sale, then you don't get any of the revenue, so it's a balance between, if they sell it in Webster and they sell it in Perrington, it's here, so do you forego the revenue, for not having it? But I think, as Donna was originally referring to, those huge grow operations of the
Right.
tomato farm, some of that falls under ag and markets law, and some of that, we may not have a whole lot of jurisdiction on, because they consider it agricultural, even though it's large buildings and, a large coverage of area, it still falls under ag and markets law, and I think that's what Webster ran into and some of the other communities ran into, where, they tried to stop it or were against it, or the community wasn't happy with it, but, they progressed anyways, just because it.
But there may be pressure on the
Margin.
community to do something like that, and certainly, we're going to have to look at that. I did actually have, I don't know why I didn't pick up on, maybe it was the other document had it in there, but we did, yeah, we did talk about the fact that we're going to have to look at the pros and cons of such activities down the road, because that may be the way people are going to accommodate farming.
I mean, in a way, it is a little tiny bit of an insurance policy against some climate change issues in terms of droughts and what,
Right.
controlled environment, whatever
Right.
you grow in. I mean, it's a
Right.
controlled environment that would sort of insulate the farmers who grows row crops from at least, having some valuable stuff growing in a greenhouse that could supplement income in a tough year. when
Right,
the
and
row
that's
crops
that's
fail.
actually a great segue into number 8, because number 8 is kind of a discussion of what Heidi Rasmussen's been wrestling with as a property owner who has an agricultural agreement on her property where, you can't do anything but agriculture at this point in time. And we're looking at some of those easements to see what we can do to make it more palatable for her to do other things that are, in keeping with agriculture, but not necessarily true agriculture. But I'm thinking in those cases, that might be a perfect example of where you'd have one of those greenhouses come in, because they've got water out there, they've got area that they can use for agricultural purposes. And as Mark said, that does fall into the purview of ag and market. So those kinds of properties, even though it's nice to have them held off as open space, they are still subject to that kind of development for agricultural use. And they might be the first targeted properties, because you know how desperate she's been to figure out what to do with that land. Now that she's got it, she really can't do anything with it. I would bet that those are the kind of properties they'd be looking at to go after for these farmers.
So is, again, same question from before, so that those types of discussions and requests are already starting to percolate? I would
Well,
assume
they haven't here. They were in Webster. They had 2 operations in Webster that were ultimately denied. But they haven't here maybe for a couple of reasons. Number one, the areas they'd be interested out in East Penfield don't have access to sanitary sewers, and you may need sewer capacity to run those kinds of operations. They use a lot of water, and there's waste, so they got to deal with that. So there's nothing out there that accommodates that. They do have a water system out there, but you may need to have a sanitary system to offset, what you're doing industrially. I say industrially, because it is kind of an industrial operation. But we have not received that kind of pressure yet that the other communities have. That's not to say that it won't happen. And we're looking at this document now to kind of sustain us for the next 10 to 15 years. And
So that's my second part of the question is, if they've had those conversations in other local communities, it's very likely that we would fall into that, so we need to have something in place.
I would think so, especially if the marijuana market takes off and everybody and their brother wants to get into that, although it's not the easiest thing to get into. But I could see a lot of pressure coming here to do something like that.
So, and is the challenge, when you brought that up, Donna, was the challenge that people didn't want to actually see those buildings? In other words, I don't want this big monstrosity in my backyard, so to speak?
Well,
or is it?
That's certainly what it was in Webster.
Yeah, there's a
And-
lot of trucking activity
Yeah.
going on. It's
There's
more like an
lights and-
industrial
It's
operation.
a big industry.
It's big
Yeah.
industry.
A lot of
If you
trucks,
look at
there's
the-
lights for grow
Yep.
lights and everything else, so it has a glow in the area, and I know they've done some to put shades on at nighttime and do some other things to help with that, but it's
It's a-
agricultural.
It's a
but
24-hour operation,
But
basically.
it's also commercial, industrial.
And as a
type
rule,
application.
is that produce or that product something that would be viable, or would it be utilized locally as a rule, or is this something that they're growing mass amounts and then shipping it out?
I
Because
think
if
it could
you're,
be
if
anywhere.
you're growing,
Yeah, they're growing tomatoes, so
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sure
up to the
Wegmans
farmer
takes
what
them
they-
tops as well as
Yeah.
anybody
Who
else
their
in the
but
region.
I'm just
customers
saying as
are.
part of our discussion, as you go through this, if the recommendation is if you are creating local produce that would, for all intents and purposes, allow us as a local community to be able to provide for ourselves a little bit more versus having to ship things in. The pandemic over the last year and a half was certainly a good reason to have
Oh,
more
no
local,
question.
so-
I think normally those kinds of operations serve like a Wegmans type operation or, Tops or something like
Or
that.
somebody
They're
that's gonna
big
take it
operations. But it may be more than just Monroe County. It might extend out quite a distance before they're not fresh
But you
anymore.
could see those serving people that are going to take those produce things and package them,
Yeah, oh, yes.
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, create another
Absolutely.
product out of them, a sauce or something like that, and then run that through a packaging facility
Right.
and ship that all over the
Yeah,
country.
maybe Desano or somebody like that would be
Correct.
taking a lot of it, It just
So again,
depends
that
on what the
leads to-
market is at the
yeah,
time.
That leads to the trucking and all of the other things that are associated with those types of operations. They become big businesses that are moving lots of things.
And
Yeah,
that's
you're
where
not-
that's where I was going with it is if the usage is, this is truly a, we'll call it a manufacturer for lack of a better term. It may be agriculture, but it's still manufacturing on a large scale.
Yeah.
That to me changes the tenor of the conversation a
It's-
lot versus large greenhouses where they're going to put a farmer's market in front and I can buy
No,
fresh strawberries.
it's
and
nothing
stuff.
like that.
So that's where I was-
That ain't it.
Yeah.
It's nothing like that.
Like these
It's
are
not
all-
Dave Woodward going down
These
the
are
side of the
grow
street with his
operations.
tractor.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And it's inputs, not just outputs, so it's not just trucks hauling tomatoes or whatever it is out. I mean,
Right.
there's a lot of inputs that go into
They're bringing
producing
things
that
to
kind
the
of
site
stuff,
as
and
well.
workers going in and out 24/7, at the facility and
I
stuff.
would
So-
imagine the grow lights alone would be enough to send the local populations, people would get very irritated with that, it'd be frustrating.
That's why it was a good situation for them in the end to go to Route 104, where they built it out there. Actually, I think it's only half built, to be perfectly honest, but it's still gigantic. But at least you're on a roadway that's got good, transportation ability to it to get you to point A to B. But here, you're out in the middle of nowhere on a 2-lane highway. it's not that great of a situation, but you still got to address it, and you got to look at it, and you got to be prepared to deal with it
Wow,
when
it's
if it
massive.
comes.
It's like 3 or 4 acres.
It's
in
only half
size.
done. That's
Correct.
only half of it.
That's half of it,
Like, the
yeah.
buildings are measured in acres.
Yeah.
I mean, there's square footage, but, you know.
And I'm sure
It's-
I'm sure there are places where it would fit okay, it would be appropriate if it were mitigated from other things around it, not near any
Right, it's
existing
perfect, a
housing and
perfect
stuff like
location
that.
for where it is
Yeah.
out on 104. I mean, you
But
barely even see it.
The primary question that you raised with me in the discussion is the requirement of a transportation corridor in order to be able to get things in and out. Well, 104 is to the north, but we don't really have within East Penfield the transportation corridors to handle those.
We don't.
7 acres.
But
So-
again, though, as markets change, you don't know who's looking for what, where, when, and why, and you've got to be prepared to deal with it if they do come. So we've got to look at that over the next several
But
years. how to
we
deal
can
with it.
tie our recommendation to transportation corridor improvements would have to be part of that process.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they don't always link together. I mean, we get a lot of truck traffic from Dolomite that runs up and down Atlantic Avenue. We get trucking for the landfill that comes through 441 and Penfield.
But nothing stops us from making the recommendation and asking, yes, ultimately the board's going to decide
Yes, it's-
down the road, yes or no, we'll do that. But
Yeah.
I think it's
Well,
logical
a
for
good
us to put that in
conversation
there,
to-
yeah.
It's
good to
a
have
lot
a
easier when they come in and ask for it. We can guide it a little bit more. With these pre-existings, it's a little harder.
Yeah, some of the other ones, I mean, the landfill's not in Penfield, so we had no jurisdiction over where and when the trucks go. They just kind of go through. A lot of the trucking goes into Wayne County for Dolomite and services out of town, so we don't have the benefit of the industry or whether.
You can't
the
even
land-
put a toll on them to
Whether the
repair
landfill's a
the
benefit
roads
or
that they
not,
destroy, you can't do
we
it.
don't even toll them, but we do see a lot of the trucking impacts and impacts on our road. You look at Atlantic Browncroft out front, and it's definitely
Drive
taking a
home
toll on
tonight
the
on
road.
Browncroft,
and
Atlantic.
We've had
No,
many
you'll get-
conversations with the
yeah, I
state
mean, I've been
DOT
stuck
about
behind
it.
those trucks, so get no disagreement with me. I'm just saying that if we know that there are some challenges in making recommendations for things like this, we can at least put some caveats to say, along with this recommendation, the town should also consider X.
Consideration
Yep.
of the infrastructure and whether infrastructure being sewers, water, roads, is there to support whatever comes.
It's kind of like what you did with the recommendations for some of the rezonings you did, where it was, the qualifier was, we recognize that we may need to grant variances for some of these properties based on the fact that they're not big enough to really accommodate a lot of development. That was a good move on your part to do that, because people down the road don't think that we thought about that. When the time comes, you did think about it, and you made it public that that's what you were thinking about, so.
No, I appreciate the dialogue because it helps me kind of structure in my mind what that looks like overall, not just putting the building up, but there's a lot more to the impact, yeah.
So much more. So, and I'd like to go back to that. We will add that in as a recommendation as to how to deal with that. But again, looking at this as an issue with, looking at these easements to see what we can do to try to assist some of these
And I
these
say,
property owners
we'll
that
send
were
this
burdened
document
with
to you, so don't feel like if you didn't say it tonight, or obviously we're missing other committee members, if they don't, we'll share it with them as well. So that's not the end of
Yeah, and if you can-
conversation on agricultural. We'll
Right.
put this out, but at least wanted to kind of show
And we want
where
your
we're
input.
going, what we're looking at, have the conversations about some of these items and at least kind of get it going. We'll send the document out, take additional feedback. I'm sure other committee members will want to weigh in as well. And
Yeah, and add anything that you think is appropriate. Donna will put your comments in regarding bringing people in as a process of getting a training program going and keeping these properties going. And then we will talk about the large agricultural buildings, that type of thing. So if you want to edit any way you see fit, please do that. We take criticism well, and we will take your comments and incorporate them. Do you want to jump to
We can jump to
business?
business development.
So business, what we did was, things had changed from 2010. What we really wanted to do is we wanted to identify the parameters of each of the business districts in the town. So we went through that. Obviously, there's a little precursor here about, what's going on. But then we incorporated wording about all the districts and, what they're made up of in terms of acreage, what their strengths are at this point in time in terms of the types of uses that are being operated from these areas. So we went right down through the Browncroft Boulevard one, the Bay Road Empire, Creek Street area. We did the Four Corners, LaSalle's Landing, which had to be updated, Lloyd's Corners, which is 441 and 250, the Panorama Valley area, which now has a lot of stuff going on there that wasn't going on a few years ago with Panorama Park. We've had some other new development down there. And then we added the mixed-use district because actually the mixed-use district is a business district in addition to being a residential zone. And we're obviously encouraging new businesses. That was the reason why we created it, was because we could not develop any new type of zoning district that would allow for like big box development or anything of that nature, just because all the areas that we have left are surrounded by residences, and you can't throw that into a residential neighborhood and expect anybody to be happy about it. And I think that we've done a good job of trying to consolidate our large areas into the 2 or 3 areas that we have now, that being Empire Boulevard, the Panorama area, and also 441 and 250. I don't see us doing anything more than that other than smaller businesses going in within the mixed-use district and then redevelopment of existing uses in the other districts. So then we talked about Four Corners, which is kind of a small mixed-use district. And
That was our
and we're
list.
done. So then we went back and we looked at strategies, and I think one of the strategies was back in 2010, and I see Doug has done some work here. You know, it was like a general statement that we should support our business districts. I mean, that's just a given that we do that. So we're looking at strategies now to try and actually make them viable, because we recognize there's a lot of competition going on now, you know, with brown boxes coming to your front door every day versus going out and actually shopping for something. Even food at this point in time, you can have food delivered to your house without having to worry about going out and getting it yourself. So I think by the time we're done, we'll all be locked in our houses and nobody will ever see each other again, and that's the end of any type of community that you have.
There'll be 3 of us, I think, the 3 of us here, maybe you guys. The 3 of us will still be out doing something. I don't plan on being locked in my house, but.
Especially after the last year.
Yeah, so if it taught me anything, it's like, no, I don't want to live 24/7 in my house. I do have a question. So
Sure.
when you talk about structuring recommendations for the businesses, one of the things, and it's funny you mentioned that, because when I read the last version, I said, well, this is a nice overview that would be an executive presentation, but it didn't really tell me anything as far as what does the town want to structure with the business.
We agree.
And this is why we changed it
That's
from an
exactly
update to a
why-
bit of a rewrite.
Right on
rewrite.
target.
Yeah, so I guess the overarching question is that when we make recommendations, especially for the areas that are mixed use, that sounds like there needs to be more open conversation about what does this mean? Are we talking about adding additional uses to mixed use? Are we talking about, in the case you said, expanding or new areas? I'm just trying to kind of get a feel for.
Well, with the mixed-use district, when a person comes in and wants to develop a certain piece of property, a good example is the one that just is opening up now next to the YMCA over on 250. They have to come to the planning board with a proposal. And there's a formula as to how much mixed use you have to have based on the square footage or the acreage of the property.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Are we talking about making a recommendation to change those formulas a little
No,
bit? Okay.
no. The recommendation is to strengthen those districts by encouraging, the boards to do what they need to do to make sure there is a viable mixed use and not just some apartment complex going up, that
Yeah,
kind
with the
of thing.
bodega in the basement.
Right,
Yeah, okay.
exactly. So I'm going to let you put these together, so I'm going to let you jump in and talk a little bit about them.
Yeah, so as part of this, one of the things that I added in or went back and looked at is in many cases, we've done previous studies in these areas, and those previous studies had recommendations. Some of them have been done. So for instance, at anyone who's lived in Penfield, especially in the western side of Penfield, and is familiar with Browncroft Boulevard and Creek Street, we did 2003, did a big study there. They had recommendations that came out of that, including, reducing curb cuts, shared parking agreements, some beautification, and aesthetic improvements to try to beef up what is one of the main entry points into Penfield. And if you live down there, one of them was looking at the realignment of Blossom, Browncroft, and Creek Street, which we've gone through 2 or 3 revisions of that, with turn islands and removing some curb cuts and things like that. But not every recommendation in all of these plans has either been implemented. So we went back to try to look at some of those and see if they had been implemented, is it something that should still be implemented or that we should be looking at implementing in the future and adding that in as part of our recommendations in the strategies?
Or is it no longer
Or are they no longer valid, or are they not?
viable to do it?
So,
Yeah.
in many cases they are, and so one of the other ones was the Bay Road, Empire Boulevard, Creek Street, which I think we called sort of the North Penfield Crossroads. You know, a recommendation of that plan back in, let's say it was 2006, but I'm kind of guessing, was that that area sort of suffers from an identity crisis. Everyone, if you talk to anybody around that area, ask them where they are, most of them will say they're in Webster.
Yep.
You know, it's the Webster Walmart, the Webster Wegmans, you know, Baytown Plaza's Webster, and they're not, they're in Penfield. And so one of the recommendations out of that, and one of the recommendations that we put in the document was sort of strengthening the identity of our business districts. You know, in many of the other towns, you're familiar with their corridors or their commercial districts, and Penfield really doesn't have a centralized, or each of our districts don't have their own identity. You can sort of go through them and not know where you are or care. So that was one of our first strengths, was strengthening Penfield businesses through additional business district identification programs, make them more of a destination to be at,
And
as opposed to something you just drive through.
One of the ways we're trying to do that is when Baytown came in for their new sign program, all their freestanding signage, we required them to put Penfield, New York under Baytown Plaza. So when you're driving down, they still haven't finished that one sign, I don't think, but when you're driving down past Baytown, you see that it's Penfield, it's not Webster. Even Walmart thought they were in Webster.
So you need to put a big sign up there, right there at the intersection that says, "You're still in Penfield."
Still here. Yep.
Well, we do have a welcome to Penfield sign at the town line, but that doesn't
But
appear to
it's
be.
hidden behind the utility pole.
Yeah, well, I mean,
RGB
But I think as
utility
you're
pole.
driving
Guys,
down the
remember, we
street,
had a whole 20-minute dissertation about the size of the signs. If you guys recall last year, that there were several folks that expressed concerns that perhaps we might want to increase those a little bit. But I like the thought of having Baytown signage. I mean,
Yeah.
but with the recommendation, I think across the board, right, for any of those would be.
some of them you
yeah.
can't because a lot of them don't even have freestanding signs. But the ones that do, I think that would be a nice policy to put that
Well,
up there.
the
To
thought
give
would
them.
be, as you come into a specific area, like when you go into the Panorama Valley, to introduce it through signage or another means as being the Panorama Valley. So
The
that
Panorama
it
Valley
should
shopping
gain sort of
district, yeah.
more of an identity and a unified, whether it's
Right.
working with some of the business owners to create a unified feel, and that they're not just individually their own shops down there by themselves, that they're part of a collective, and that through, you know, business identification effort, that they can, you know, more than individually, they can amplify their presence.
Right.
I say, Jim, you've worked with the Penfield Business Chamber for a number of years, and their groups, obviously, the businesses would need to be part of that discussion. It's not the town, you know,
No.
saying this is who you are and what you are, but it would be, you know, the town working with those business districts to come up with what their identity is and have conversations and support them and what they'd like to do. I know we've done different things in the past with banners up and down the street to good or bad. You know, we've done some beautification projects. We've done some other things to greater and lesser success, but obviously the town is still open to that and, you know, conversations with those groups and trying to, you know, keep our business and commercial properties viable.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know I just recently read an article about, I think it's probably Ithaca that has a couple of areas that they do different types of signage that's very specific, like they have certain times of the year they put up for the veterans, right, that are in their community. There's banners that run along the town. So
Yeah.
if we could take something similar and make banners along that area, there's nothing draws you more to a particular area that knowing something began and ends. Oh, okay, well, this section has this defining, I mean, I like that.
We actually did that with each of the districts back in, I think Channing was here as the supervisor. The big problem that we ran into is we had banners and we had flower baskets hanging from the lamppost. The problem was we had to go water those every morning at 5 o'clock or 5:30 before traffic started because you had to water the flowers. There's no way around it. You had to water them every day and sometimes twice a day. And that got to be a real problem because they were out there, in traffic trying to do it. And secondly, we had the banners, but the banners, their life expectancy was like almost nil. I mean, the truck traffic going through there, they were wrapping them back and forth to the point where they're all getting torn up and shredded. I think that if we had gone with a metal type banner instead of the material one, they'd probably be fine now. But, everything's maintenance. Everything you put up, you have to maintain it. If you don't maintain it, it
This
looks
is
horrible.
441, but you can see the banners are up there. You can see in the lower one, we had daylilies down the middle and, some other stuff. Dealing with the state, dealing with salt and some of the other environmental concerns obviously makes that, a challenge, but,
Oh, and I'm sure,
we're open to it, and the
there's
town's
challenges
looking
to
at
that,
doing
but you talked about wanting to create we'll
Right.
call it a neighborhood feel
A
for
sense
your
of place,
business
right.
districts. That's the way to do it, because I know when I entered the first banner, when I exited, and I know within that particular
Right.
area, that ties that together. And I think if you want to encourage the businesses to be part of that, not so much writing a check, so to speak, but being engaged in helping decide, well, what should those banners represent, and what should it look like, and what's the message we want
Right.
for this business district.
And there's some buy-in. I mean, in the Four Corners, we'll need to get businesses to go out and water the flowers. If the town put the flowers out and did that, it's just manpower, and we've scaled back our forces and continue to streamline. So it's just going to need to be a buy-in between the business district that they've got to have somebody that goes out there and waters them every day from their business, and they own that planter that,
Kind of adopt it, yeah.
that garden is theirs. And, we were just chatting earlier today, back in the day, I remember used to be a lot of the, gardens coming into Penfield, they'd have, owned by, Rotary Garden was that, it used to be like called it Brady Mobile, but, at the corner of Browncroft and Blossom, there was a garden there on the corner, and, the Rotary Club owned that and took care of that. It's just hard to find people that wanna or have extra time or time to dedicate to do some stuff like that. So whether the businesses would be interested in that, but having an individual or a family, it's just harder and harder to find people that will put that.
Yeah, but I mean,
put that
if you work
commitment
with the
into it.
businesses to be part of
Hopefully, if
that,
it's a
again,
benefit to their
yeah.
business and it generates them revenue and it looks nicer and upgrades the area, you would think that would be a benefit to them, and they would, they'd be on board.
Okay. So, like I said, one of the other ones was reevaluating the previous business district studies, including considerations of any outstanding unimplemented recommendations. Like I said, many of them were implemented. If you go to Browncroft and Creek, there were some curb cuts that were pretty much right at the intersection that have been reduced in previous, but that doesn't hold true in some of the other areas, and there were other recommendations as part of some of those studies that just haven't been implemented, whether it's specific greening requirements or reducing curb cuts or providing alternative or shared parking. Our hope is as they redevelop, we can encourage that either through future studies or through recommendations from this committee.
And I think we may add to that is updating some of those studies, because those came in, are beneficial if we've got a study in place and the state comes through, like Empire Boulevard. A lot of our stuff talked about adding a middle turn lane. We were able to leverage, say, hey, we've got a study here. You guys, if you're going to redo the corridor, you need to look at what the study recommended. You guys were part of it. We incorporate them in with the traffic piece of it.
Right.
But that kind of got the middle turn lane all the way from Plank Road all the way on up, was we had that study in place, and we can kind of say, hey, we've got this here. You guys were part of it. This is a great way to help with traffic, reduce some collisions and everything else. So I think, one, to, Doug's point, go back and see what we had, and two, if they need, if they've all been implemented, great. If not, re-engaging some of those, district, studies, and then when and if the state or the county comes along, we've got some documentation in place and, can help us to have some leverage with them that we've looked at it. Here's the recommendations that came out of a committee. Here's what came out of the traffic study, here's what came out of accident report or whatever else. So they've helped in the past. And, that Empire Boulevard corridor we just saw, most recently, they, eliminated some curb cuts and did some other, sidewalk improvements and did some, pedestrian, benefits in that area that we've, kind of been hanging out there for years that got cleaned up.
Doug, or Jim or Mark, when you talk about the studies that are done, and I understand that the sort of quantitative nature of studies like traffic studies and so forth, but do you do any more subjective research, polling residents and businesses in the area in terms of saying, what do you think the biggest challenges to, let's say, people accessing your place of business are in this area? What would best facilitate people being able to park here more easily? Do you do any of those things that are a little more on the
and obviously,
subjective
Donna,
side?
obviously, the answer is always traffic generation is a problem for a lot of people. Everybody thinks a business wants a lot of traffic,
Yeah.
but if you can't get into the business or get out of the business during peak periods, it's not a benefit to them at all. Certainly, traffic lights, traffic calming, those types of things, we're very sensitive to that. We know, you look at Empire Boulevard, it's a perfect example. Empire Boulevard, I mean, there's a lot of people that would love to develop on Empire Boulevard, but traffic's an issue down there, and we've been working with the state for years trying to figure out ways to solve it. The irony of the whole situation is with the state is they're a reactive agency that as accidents occurred because of more conflict points or curb cuts out to it, that's when they start reacting to how to deal with the issue. Obviously, they like to move traffic as quickly and efficiently as possible. When it's no longer efficient, that's when they start looking at ways to solve problems. We've had that problem on 441 for years, too. People love 441, the Four Corners, but it is difficult at times to get in and out of these properties. And there's not a lot of gapping to get from, from the one green light to the next green light or the one red light to the next red light. It's difficult to move forward back and forth through there. So
We've worked with the state and finally have turn arrows and dedicated turn pockets in those areas because of that. Jim, you've worked with a lot of the businesses in the Four Corners to get
creating
parking.
parking, parking's the other
Parking,
big
so we've
issue.
talked to
You gotta
them,
have
and
parking.
Jim, has worked closely with all the businesses down there, and they said, we don't have parking, whether it's, there's really not on street on 441, that's readily available, so we looked at consolidating some parking areas. We've now got some town-owned lots behind them that, if they've got parking and people have safe places to access in, but you've worked closely with those businesses for years.
Yeah, interconnection is good, too. I mean, you look at Mott's Lane. Mott's Lane was extended both with the town and an individual who stepped forward to help do it. I think that's been a godsend for a lot of those businesses down there, just because you've got alternate means of access out of that area without having to go out onto 441.
Yep.
You can get the 5 Mile line fairly quickly and
Similarly,
safely.
in the 250, 441,
Same thing, yeah.
which is the TF overlay or 250 overlay, Doug's right in there. That's something we've created, it was before I was here, but the LUAMP district, so Land Use and Access Management Plan. So actually, new businesses come in if they don't install a rear access drive. Doug pulled up, you've got UR Medicine, they installed the rear access drive. Other businesses that don't implement an item, they come in, they pay into the district. Excuse me, so we're looking at, hopefully a future traffic light at the end of Pembroke Drive. So we've been collecting some funds for that. And then as this group looked at possible rezonings of those properties to the north of where the gymnastics facility is, if we could get a traffic light there and then an access point in there, now you can get into those plazas. But we've looked and done connections from Comparado's Plaza down through. So if you shop over there, you could take some of the traffic away from the intersections. Or if you're going from, UR Medicine or, whatever in the plaza, and you need to go to the post office, and then you want to go to some other business, every time you don't have to go back out. And, you go to other communities, and I go to other towns where we all travel, and you just want to get from here to there, and you got to go back out onto the road, turn, come back, go back in. So that's one of the
Yeah, so
things
I'm sure people make decisions, you know what, I'll go to the first place, but I'm not going to go to the second two
Right,
because
it's
I don't
too
feel
hard.
like having to, yeah.
So we've been trying to make interconnections between there and rear access drives and connections,
Burger King?
between those locations. And, Jim's bringing up a new one right now. We've got a new Burger King that's coming in, and
They're going to be tying into the existing old area there where the restaurant is.
You know,
or
where
was.
Moe's is now, so you've
That
got
will be able
Panera,
to
then
take
you've got
you from
Moe's. There's one.
Jeremiah's right up to 441.
Oh, okay, so that's where the new Panera, where they built out.
Right.
Across from the Target, right?
Panera's there, you've got Moe's and T-Mobile or something in that
Here to enter an
business,
exit.
and then now Burger King's coming in, they're gonna make a connection behind the car wash that now gets you over to the back of what used to be Perkins, that connects through, so now if you wanted to go from one to the other, so we've been working through that whole district on each kind of quadrant to make these rear access drives, and
Yeah. Connectability is very important.
Yep.
Yeah, then-
So the question, though, that I guess maybe I didn't frame my question very clearly. I fully appreciate, and I am one of those people who say, oh, God, I don't want to deal with it because of the traffic. So I definitely get that, but what I was driving at when I asked if you asked sort of a little bit more kind of subjective, nuanced sort of questions, was, are there things, and this probably falls into the purview of the Penfield Chamber or something like that, but that might come up in a more general survey. Are there other types of things that would help these businesses thrive a little better, possibly by interacting with each other a little better? Or, I think about, say, Panorama Plaza with the flooding that occurs there at certain times of the year, and how even parking lots are laid out, and for years the signage being kind of really mishmash and unattractive and stuff like that. And not that it would be your job to take care of those things, but in the course of a survey that you're doing more broadly, maybe partnering with Penfield Chamber or something like that to get a more comprehensive picture on how the health of those businesses, could be improved, not just the physical infrastructure of roads,
Yeah.
but is there a more holistic, kind of integrated way to look at improving the health of those businesses? So that's what I'm, kind of.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you're right. I think the chamber probably should work with us to take that on with at least their membership, if nothing else. See what the responses might come out to be. Finding a lot of one of the big problems over the years that I see is a lot of the businesses want to operate, and they want to operate on their own. A lot of them don't join the chamber for one reason or another. And they really want town to stay out of their business, and we've respected that. I mean, I understand. I don't want to be on somebody's neck every day saying, you got to do this, you got to do that. But I think a lot of them just don't interact a lot with a lot of their neighbors or other businesses within the community. I've noticed that on a large-scale basis, especially in the Four Corners. They kind of go to work every day. It's their business. They run it. Then they go home at night. And that's pretty much it. They don't do a lot. And I understand the problem, too, because, I mean, when you're working during the day, and that's how you're making your living, you don't have time to spend a lot of time interacting outside of the business venue to try and, go to lunches with the PBC or anything like that. It's difficult. And they know it's difficult. They've tried to do it in the evenings. They've tried to do it in the mornings before business started. But you're just not getting that big camaraderie that you would like to see with all these businesses in a lot of cases.
So you're talking about almost a challenge there to get a level of community spirit in order to want to work together for a common goal. Like something X would improve all of our business, but if you can't get them all to sit down to talk about what X is,
Right.
there's.
And I'm not sure that they wouldn't want to. It's just that, I mean, it's like a one-man operation or one-woman operation, and they can't leave their business to go and do that. I mean,
And with the pandemic, that's got to be extremely.
well, yeah, and everything
People are-
changed because of
yeah.
that. I mean, everybody's trying to recover from
They're
that.
just trying to survive.
Yeah, exactly.
And you meet with the chamber monthly, so I mean, we
We
have.
meet
a lot
with
of
them every
interaction.
month. I got a meeting coming up in 2 weeks with them again. But they find that to be a problem, too. I mean, they understand it.
So question, I don't know, maybe I would love to sit in on a chamber meeting at some point as a member of the board, just to listen to what they discuss, what their drivers are, because then I feel like we could bring that back and make it part of the conversation. I
mean,
don't
I
know if
can
anybody
certainly-
else is interested, but I would love to at least sit in on a meeting or two if they would allow a fly on the wall.
Yeah, I could certainly hook you up with Amy Valeni, who's our contact. She's the president this year, so.
I mean, because from my perspective, although I'm not a business owner, I mean, it is a significant lifeblood of the community is the health of the businesses that are in the community.
Well, certainly as a member of this committee, it would make sense that you would want to do that with them. I'm sure they would appreciate that.
Okay.
And you can hear their perspective of it as well while you're there.
Yeah.
So before you leave tonight, I'll give you Amy's number and you can contact her.
I will do that.
I'll take
Thank
it too, Jim.
Okay?
Sorry, I didn't want to speak for you, Donna, but it just
No.
felt like that was something we were
No.
kind of, yeah.
That would be great.
Sounds good.
And we did have a question. You talked about the recommendations that have been made over the years. Obviously, they weren't all made on the 2020 comprehensive plan.
No.
But they were made through additional studies and things like that.
2000 plan, 2010 plan, and other
Is the
studies.
goal to put those either directly into the plan as part of like an addendum or a recommendation? In other words, how granular do we get with putting those?
The studies themselves are actually recommendations that come out of the comprehensive plan. I mean, this comment here would be that.
we
They
re-
all
we
become,
reference them
they all
all in the
become part of the
document, so-
comprehensive plan, but they do it in a separate documentation.
Yeah, but the references will be there.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Yeah,
Doug's pulling up, but we reference all the plans that are there, and the plans are on our website as well. So if somebody reads this document and says, well, I'd like to know more about the Four Corners plan, you can go back to the website, and, we can make links through this as well.
Well, it's interesting
to connect to
because
those.
we are even now diving into more granularity in this section than we did when we talked about it initially. It was really, I think we spent 15 minutes, we blew through
Right.
it. And so this is much more informational as far as,
Good.
yeah.
Good.
And I'm going to speak on behalf of, I think, every member of this committee, present and not present, just thank Doug and Jim and Mark, and I think maybe Doug, it's on you, for really taking this and really kind of shaking the moths out and rebuilding this plan and not just tweaking it. I think it needed it, and I know it's a lot of work, so thank you.
Thank you.
problem.
We agree with you
Thanks
100%.
for sticking with us,
you.
'cause
When
it's-
when we really started sitting down with the second half of the document, we were looking at the previous strategies and their sort of implementation items, and we looked at them and we were like, a lot of them weren't really implementation items. They were just sort of, and some of them were pie in the sky.
Feel-good
It was
statements.
Like, we're going to support businesses, or
Yeah.
agriculture. The statement was largely Penfield will be an agricultural community forever, and it's like, well, things are changing, and we have to adapt to how they're changing. And I mean, even in ag and market side, what was previously allowable as an agricultural operation is not, 20 years ago, is different than what it is today. And we wanted to bring some more actionable items.
We think you guys
For
brought that out in
consideration.
this too, because
Yeah.
in previous plans, we had consultants. And the consultants were writing stuff and throwing it back at the committee, and the committee said, yeah, it looks good. But I don't think anybody's sitting down and thinking about really what's happening. And, bringing in the farmers that night was great because it gave us perspective about what they deal with, which we didn't know either. I mean, we learned just as much as you did that night. But it kind of was a rude awakening as to the fact that, oh my God, these guys are not, it's not, they're not millionaires, they're not this, they're not that, they're just working real hard, and a lot of them are our age now, and they're not going to be working very much longer. So that was a big help to us, I think, in starting to look at everything in Penfield as to how it really is versus what we all kind of wish it was,
Well, and I will say too, is that you're going to find that as the next generation of population comes in, the way they look at these zones and businesses and things are going to be very different than what we do. And if we can't, we have to give some guidance to be
Right.
prepared for that. Like 5G is just one of many other things.
Right.
You were talking about the green light. I just read an article recently that said, for all intents and purposes, fiber is dead. It's on its way out. 5G is going to, so I don't want to make a recommendation for the 2020 plan to say, yeah, keep putting time and effort into fiber, because I know that the viability of fiber is almost done now.
That's right.
And I'll say we put some pie in the sky. We will put some kind of future thought of the town of Penfield is supportive of new technologies, because
technologies
by the
they
time you
develop.
hit print on this, there'll be something, 6G will be out and something else. So some of those things just says, yes, we're supportive of this, but also future technologies, communications, infrastructure. So some of
But
those
I mean,
may
I
be a
think-
little, I won't say fluffy, but we don't know what that next thing is, or if we're going 5 and, or
That's-
10 and 15 years out.
But you can,
We don't
you
know where
can
that goes.
put, you can put some vision into ensuring that the new technologies can be folded into, in such a way as to not be disruptive to the communities and yet
Right.
still provide the technology. I mean, there's ways you can word it so it's not,
You know, totally
I'm going to
intrusive.
bulldoze
and-
everything and put down a big tower. I mean, it's.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we're going to turn Four Corners into a wind, wind farm or something. I mean, those kinds of things, I mean, you've got to be careful what you do. Obviously, that wouldn't happen, but you could take an old farm out in East Penfield and turn it into a wind farm that may not be what we really want it to be out there, But I think you're right. Technology changes, hopefully for the better, and we have to address that as it comes, and it can't be a disruption to the community as we do it.
Yeah, one of the things that I would like to see us do is have at least one working session with a couple of just college-age Penfield residents to come in and talk to us a little bit about their view of the community so that we can take that into account. Because, nothing, I mean, great group here, but we're all on the other side with one exception of 50 now. And so, we don't look through the same lens that
Right.
these guys,
It would be good to have college kids come in. It would also be good to have like a 30-year-old or a 32-year-old come in who's.
Oh, by then they're jaded. It's too late.
Well, I mean, but they're buying houses, and they're trying to go through that process of becoming a citizen of the time. Sometimes they didn't even grow up here, and when you get kids that did grow up here, they want it the way it was when they were kids because it was a great life for them. But you've got people coming in now, a lot of people coming in. It would be interesting to hear what
And they're
their
looking through it
perspective of
completely
it
different.
is.
I was kind of hoping you were going to chime up and say, yeah.
Or they end up moving out, like what
Right.
like what I did. So it's been forever since I really introduced myself, but I grew up in Penfield. I went to Scribner Road, Bay Trail, House A, graduated Penfield High School. When I first started looking for houses, I looked at house prices in Penfield, and there was realistically one house I looked at in Penfield, but I was priced out at the time, and so I
Well,
live in East
yeah.
Arundequoit now. I would like to move back to Penfield, and between my fiance and I now, we're in more of a financial position where that's possible. But for a time, I moved out because I couldn't afford Penfield.
And this is the big problem. Young people are having a difficult time getting back into town if they've lived here or if they want to live here. The pricing of the housing in this town is just astronomical now. Even if you own a house, my daughter owns a house. She's owned one for 6 years now, and she wants to get a bigger house. Well, she can get a lot of money for her house, but she can't pay for the house that she wants to get into.
Yeah, the differential
And they're
is
killing
so,
each
yeah.
other. The kids are they're like piranha. They're
that's just
just
not a
eating each
Penfield
other
issue,
up trying
that's
to get to a
a-
house.
a
I mean,
regional
right now,
issue
the housing,
now.
housing prices is sort of a
That's true.
national issue, but,
Yeah, I mean,
Locally.
I mean,
Years
I
ago,
think
5 years ago.
some of that will dissipate over a little bit of time, but across the board, before the pandemic, as a group, we talked about the fact that the cost of starter homes was through the roof here, and it was
Right.
difficult.
Right.
And again, there's not a lot of alternatives for people who are not homeowners. So we have a few, but we certainly don't have a broad spectrum of rental type units that could be available to younger people just coming out of college that maybe don't want to buy a house just yet.
And
Right.
even the rental units we do have are
Astronomical.
astronomical. Pembroke down on 250 and 441, which was built originally as a senior complex, low-income senior complex. Right now, their rent for one bedroom is more than my mortgage and property taxes in East Arundequoit.
No, we're going to spend, I hope, a lot of time dedicated just to this type of a topic, right, at another meeting, just to the sort of the housing.
We certainly
I know
can.
that
Yeah.
was one issue that we,
Yeah, and we're not looking to,
discussed.
I mean.
Yeah.
yeah.
We're having a lot
okay.
of conversation tonight, but we'll kind of, again, we'll move section by section and move through, and it'll
Yeah.
take the time it
No,
takes. and
I
look
just mean,
into it.
I'm looking at the rest of what Doug has on the page and thinking probably he
And
wants to
we
get
can
through
go
some
through
of
these,
that.
and I know
Yeah,
we're
for sure.
doing that.
Like I said, I didn't want to derail, but I just,
No, it's
I
good
mean,
to-
okay.
yeah.
That's why
I
we're
mean,
here.
The younger perspective for me would be helpful.
Yeah, you're going to find
That's helpful.
all the kids I know in their 30s are they're really down, they're disheartened by it, actually. I mean, a lot of them have given up. My daughter actually did give up. She had a friend who put in a $60,000 over asking price, and it was rejected because somebody else put in a $100,000 over asking price. She just said, the heck with it, I'll just wait till the interest rates climb and people drop out, and I'll sell my house. You know, and I think you're right. At some point in time, this will kind of calm down, but she's putting an addition on her house now in lieu of selling it and going somewhere else. So it's really disheartening. We have a girl that works with us, young lady works with us. She's looking for houses right now. She just put in an offer and in Spencerport, but she's been looking for months and months and months trying to find something. So it's not easy for them to find what they're looking for and can afford.
Yep. Getting back into business districts, we'll move a little further. So, so D is one of those sort of pie in the sky that we talked about, you know, ensuring that there's adequate infrastructure and technology in place to accommodate new commercial and industrial operations. Fiber has been slowly expanding in Penfield. Hopefully that does help bolster some, especially in the business districts, you know, having access to high-speed internet, especially with the prevalence of telecommuting and things like that. Hopefully that is a boom to them, but we didn't really, like Mark said, you know, if we put 5G in the document, you know, 6G is going to come.
Right.
If we leave it a little bit more broad technology, whether that's cellular, satellite, SpaceLink, or whatever Tesla's new one is, just putting that in there. So E was modifying the zoning code to implement a greater allowance for shared parking, cross-access agreements, and open space considerations in all business districts. So in the 254-41, we have a special overlay called the TF overlay. Because they're very busy roads, when they rezoned sections of those roads in 2011 to business non-retail, one of the defining factors was that they were all supposed to come off of rear access drive, reduce their curb cuts off of 441, reduce their curb cuts off of 250, so that there's fewer conflict points because you're coming in either off of like Harris Whalen Road or out by Willow Pond, you know, because eventually we're hoping it'll develop out that way. That there are fewer conflict points, so you have these rear access drives to assist in that. You know, the overlay allows for lower green space requirements if you're willing to put that rear access drive with lower setbacks, so that you can keep sort of the front side green while sort of on the back end having a rear access drive and parking that is hidden more from view and is more, you know, is hidden by the building or the structure. It's something that we found or would be helpful in a lot of other districts, business districts, because right now the TF overlay is very specific to the 250-441 corridor, but it's not our only commercial district. But being able to apply that more to like the Empire Boulevard corridor, where we could possibly reduce curb cuts onto Empire Boulevard, have people come on off of side streets. It's a lot of those areas are working on pre-existing non-conforming lot sizes. You know, so we've done a couple right now where they were looking on at converting, you know, either previously residential that houses that were right on Empire Boulevard on like quarter-acre lots and trying to fit commercial, even a small building with parking and things like that within our existing formulaic code is very difficult. So being able to reduce the setbacks, especially to, you know, if they were to bring in a private drive, you know, at some point it becomes a front setback, so you reduce the amount of buildable area to a very small square. So being able to do reduced setbacks and having considerations for sharing parking with your neighbor. So instead of having everybody having, you know, 20 parking spaces that they're going to use, you know, intermittently throughout the day, being able to say, hey, let's each do 10. You know, I'm an evening type business. I'm, you know, a restaurant, and next to, you know, somebody that may have an office that's, you know, really busy 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Being able to share some parking. And it's something that we've seen to be very successful. In the TF overlay district.
It's also done in the Four Corners district, too. I mean,
Yeah, well, the
it's-
TF overlays,
it's-
the
the
Four
Four
Corners
Corners,
district,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think also reducing our parking demand, as Doug said, we kind of had a formulaic, you had to 5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet or something to that effect. But I think the days of mass parking at a mall, I don't see those coming back now that so many people get, whether it's Amazon or deliveries and everything else. I don't think the parking demand at Christmas time shopping is what you used to design for, is the one day a year and you had to have enough parking spaces in Home Depot's parking lot or anything else. So some of the stuff we've been looking at is reducing our parking code, working with the businesses to say, what do you really need? How many spaces do you need? We look at it to make sure, I won't say it's a forever building, but, you may have a specific need and only have 2 employees, but your building, you may not be there forever. It needs to accommodate some semblance of, what makes sense. But we worked with Baytown Plaza when they put in Walmart. We reduced their parking demand code from there. Now that you see Starbucks is in the middle of it, so we reduced the parking code. They didn't have to have the requirement for it, so now they could fit Starbucks in the middle. So as Jim had said earlier, while we may not be expanding our commercial districts, if we reduce the parking demand, we can then fit maybe some other businesses within those boundaries. So you can create no more economic benefit. You can, still utilize them, but you don't need the fields of parking that never go.
Well, and that also makes that whole
utilized.
destination feel for folks coming in
Right.
much greater. I can go over to UPS store, I can get myself a Starbucks, I can head down to the drugstore, so it's all within that one area.
And
So, yeah.
they've got some plans for some other restaurants in the middle and to kind of create a little, they've kind of got that street of shops. So as we've reduced what we require for the parking demand, before Walmart said we want so many parking spaces, they have to be dedicated to us, and it kind of just left a big block in the middle and there's nothing else around it, where they've even seen, you pull up now and get your stuff delivered to your car and you drive off, or you get it, Uber Eats or something to your house. So I think they've even seen that the parking demand's not for it as well. So that's
And
helpful on the business end to see
as
that.
we've done, we've had several business redevelopment or commercial applications in the recent past. Almost all of them have gone to the zoning board to get a variance from our parking requirement, because they say, your code says we need 60 spaces. We need, based on, the amount of seating we're doing in our restaurant and the amount of employees we're going to have, we need 48 spaces at the max. We're going to go to the zoning board to get a variance from your parking requirement. And that's been a pretty regular occurrence with any business. For the most part, any business that we've done recently, or commercial applications that we've done recently, is they've gone to the zoning board to seek relief from our parking, because at this time, our parking code requires more parking than they say they need.
And with us going to, driverless vehicles over the next 15 years, maybe, within the life of this document, you won't even need parking spaces anymore. You're just going to pull up because somebody's going to get you into a vehicle. You're just going to go to the store, get out, shop for 20, 30 minutes, and there'll be a car waiting for you to take you back home. There won't be a need for parking spaces anymore.
And building into our
Interesting.
parking requirements as well as the possibility of, specific or styled spaces or pullouts or things for certain, for the gig economy. So as restaurants, there's a lot of restaurants that now have dedicated Grubhub parking spaces or DoorDash parking spaces, or they create pull-offs, right by one of their rear doors or something like that, so that drivers can pull up, load up, take their deliveries, out. And we really don't have anything that accounts for that
So,
in our.
guys, we discussed the need for a recommendation to have the board reduce the parking requirements on 2/5/19 when we met. Because this whole conversation is not a very deja vu-ish to me. I'm like, I know we've talked about this before. So, and I'm sorry, it took me a couple of minutes because I've got a whole book of notes here, but that was, we discussed it, and
Okay.
we said as a team, or as a group, we were going to recommend that the whole parking.
Yeah, so now we're coming back to actually adding those items in. So we kind of talked at a grand scale. Now we're coming back into, let's add those bullet point items and itemize what we want to do. And
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, we also talked about the fact that that some of the business districts, or some of the way the parking was, you talked about shared parking, but it was also about, there is you're coming up 250, there's on the other side of the street from Wegmans and all the rest of it, but then on the other over there, you've got this massive parking lot with a mall, with a shopping center that has very little coverage in there.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things you were going to talk about, what recommendations would we make for those
Colorado
businesses? So-
Plaza across the way. And actually, since we've talked about reducing the parking, they've come back with, and you've seen their parking reconfigured. One, I think it's a much safer layout, but they've talked about actually adding another building into their parking lot now that, one, the demand's not as big. So again, you can see some infill commercial. We're not expanding business districts, but you're getting more businesses on the same footprint. So as you said, now you can go from the post office to get Starbucks to get something for lunch and go to the doctor, all kind of in one area. And one, you reduce trips, you reduce, the amount of traffic on the road, but, you can kind of get more businesses in one area that, is
A lot of
better-
things
better
did happen
economics.
while we were away from each other over that period of time. A lot of new buildings came in. We had 2 Starbucks built, one at Baytown and one here. A lot
Well,
of
just
things
across the street.
happened.
But this plaza redeveloped with all the, yes,
I
that
know
was
there's
first,
a Starbucks in Baytown. Where's the other one?
Right here.
was the first Niagara building. It's not open yet, but it was the first Niagara
okay.
building right at the front
brand new
of
picture,
the.
basically.
Yeah, Google just updated their aerial imagery, so
The
this is.
Plaza Salvatore's is in the back. There's the Mexican
Probably
place.
since
It's got
March of
Valvoline.
21?
Yep.
Right
April
next to that,
21?
it was a bank, and now that's redeveloping into a Starbucks in that location.
Yeah, you're right.
So I'm glad we're coming back around to where we talked about a year ago, or 2 years ago now at this point, but now is when we're, we kind of floated those ideas out there, but now's the time we got to
We
get
just
it.
don't count the last year. We just,
Yeah, that was
we'll cut it right out.
Well, last year,
That was just the kind of the gap
that didn't
period.
happen, did it? It's a little surreal.
Yes.
And as we continue working out the document, we'll include specific, we'll pull out each of those strategies and pull out specific implementation items. So under, different ones, be able to pull out, especially in this business one, whether specific districts may require specific recommendations, and whether some may be broadly applied to all the business districts. Whether we pull out specific ones, so this district really could utilize this, like the North Penfield one, really the Penfield identity is one of the biggest issues in that one, whereas, the overabundance of parking is in another one, or, figuring out what we can do to foster the business non-retail development along the 250-441 corridor. We'll try to break out specific and individualized requirements or recommendations in those sections.
So again, we'll give you this, section written down so you can read through the, each line and come back with more comments, suggestions. But we kind of wanted to run through this as the stuff we've been working on. I've been working on the sustainability sections. We'll get that out shortly. Jim, Doug, I know you're working on government leadership section. Jim, you've got a couple other sections, so those are the ones and some of the stuff we're.
Community character and historic preservation, and
Right.
the governmental leadership and civic engagement. I want to expand that one out a little bit more than what it was.
So those are some of the next sections that we're seeing. I think that's the materials we had to share tonight. I know we got to talk about, we talked about the last meeting about scheduling site trip. So we wanted to go look at the Gary Smith property. We wanted to look at Ryan Morse's property up
Right.
on Empire Boulevard. So I think Doug's got some dates he wanted to float out. So we wanted to kind of get that scheduled, whether we do it all as a group. We'll schedule one time, and then obviously we'll get permission. So if somebody can't come on that day, committee members can still go at off times, but we'll try to at least schedule one tour opportunity for everybody with that. So we want to schedule that, and then also look at scheduling the next meeting where we're in here and, going through new sections, and we'll get your paperwork out ahead of that.
So when were you thinking about doing the?
We want to try to maintain the Tuesdays, because I know that was the original date we sort of agreed upon early on, if Tuesdays are still the best day for the committee to keep meeting. We were looking at July 13th.
Works for me.
Puts it about 2 weeks out from now.
Is
and
that for the?
That's for the site tour.
That's for the site
Site
walk.
tour, and
then
so were you
we're
thinking about
looking at
doing
the
that, starting a little bit earlier with that?
That's another
Yeah.
thing we're going to flat out to the group is, could we do a 5:30 or something, and then go, if that worked for people to do earlier in that evening, and then, meet at one location, and then start doing our tour from there, and then, look at other spots. But first, we kind of want to focus on whether the date worked, and then two, time-wise, whether we could start a little earlier and do some of those. And then we'll come up with a route and a path and everything else. So if somebody's a little bit late, they can catch up, or,
How many more other than those two? Do we have others that we have to look at?
We only had two we were going to look
I
at.
thought
we had
we
the two
had,
from the last meeting. I don't know if there was any others that were still out there that,
I'm going through and
Up in the
listening
air.
to our conversation about the recommendations, because I want to prepare a memo for you to review, to send to the town board. So I'm going back and listening to all of the recommendations that you made
Okay.
up to now, just to make sure that
have it in one.
we're right and exact as to what you had said, which is long. I went through one the other day in November of 2019. It was like 2 hours. You were just about ready to make the application, or make the recommendation. It was like a cliffhanger on a TV show. Well, we'll do it the next meeting. So tomorrow I have to go and listen to December 3rd.
In our next episode.
It was funny, actually. I go, 2 hours and I didn't get anything from it.
So does the 13th work for everybody, at least at this
Yes.
point? And then does an earlier time
Sure.
work? What time?
You tell me,
Whenever it works
anytime
for
after
you
5
guys.
works for me. I can do
I
5.
could do 5:30.
5:30?
5:30?
Why don't we say 5:30, and then,
Good.
do we want to start on the Empire piece, or maybe we start over on Northrop and then let traffic settle a little bit, and then we'll get over to Empire?
Yeah, you don't want to be on Empire Boulevard
Like
at
Empire at
5:30.
5:30 is probably
So-
not the best.
Let's say
best
maybe,
of
so we'll
places.
start on, and we'll send the location of the map.
Are we going to meet there individually, or are you going to do the vehicle like you did last time?
Whatever the preference of the group is, I'll check and make sure we can do that, with COVID restrictions and
Well, it was
everything else.
nice because we
think
could, as a
everybody's.
group, we could talk
could
in the
talk. It would
van,
be
and we
safer,
could say,
too.
we could
Yeah.
kind of bounce
Yeah.
back and forth.
I'll just confirm that we can do that. I think everybody here is vaccinated, so I don't see an issue, but we can get the
Well,
rec van and
certainly, we could wear masks.
if need be or something.
Yeah,
in the vehicle.
I'll adhere to whatever rule they say,
Okay.
yeah.
Actually, don't we have to get them to verify that they're vaccinated?
They did.
Yeah.
They
Oh, you
submitted,
did?
yeah, they
Y'all
all
did?
submitted their stuff
Yeah.
to
I'm
the
sorry?
HR.
You submitted your vaccination?
I did not.
You did not?
I have not submitted it yet.
Okay.
He's got his
Okay.
mask,
That's
but,
okay. Very good.
but yeah, between now and then, I'll confirm we can get the rec van. If so, we'll meet here 5:15, 5:30. Everybody get in, and then 5:30, we'll hit the road, and then we'll go to Gary Smith's property. We'll do that on Northrop first. We can go around to Blank, check on the current side of things, let Empire calm down a little bit, and then we'll be over there 6:30 or whatever time, we get over there, and then we'll go over and look at or actually, we could come in from the Littlewood side and kind of look from the inside piece
That's
first.
really what you want to do, is look at from the neighbor's perspective.
Look from the
Right.
neighbor's perspective, and then we can kind of drive around down
Right.
below and then look at, what the visibility is from down below as well, so. Okay, so I'll verify the van, we'll commit to the 13th, we'll send it out to the rest of the group for that, for 5:30.
We'll see the three of you there.
We'll see who else joins us, but we'll be there. And then I think Doug was looking at the next meeting, and I know he's been floating dates with everybody.
So I sent out July 22nd, it's a Thursday, and July 27th, a Tuesday. So far, an equal number of people have said they're available both of those days. I know, Harold, you said the 27th doesn't work. I think, unless I reread or misread my email.
Well, off the top of my head, I can't tell you why I told you the 27th wouldn't work.
But you know it
I
does.
mean,
right?
not to put you on the spot, after I'd sent it out, I sort of.
So which date had the greater number of people that could attend?
They were both equal. Of the responses I got back, 4 of you said you could come on the 22nd, 4 said they could come on the 27th.
Well, I could do,
That's not-
I could do either, so
Yeah.
you don't have a subset of those that could do both?
No.
No.
Yeah, because that's what I would do those too. But you know,
The ones who said they were available both were you, Donna, and Roland, who couldn't make it tonight. So they were available. I think Harold was the only one I had who said he was unavailable on the 27th, but if you are available the 27th, that's,
To be honest with you, I have to look at my other calendar. I don't have everything on this one, and I don't remember why I said the 27th wouldn't work.
well, striking while the iron's hot is always a good thing in my book, so I would vote for the 22nd just because it's sooner, less
Yeah.
can go like wrong between now and
Well,
then.
Yeah, that's a Tuesday night too, wasn't it?
That one's the
22nd 's a
22nd is
Thursday.
a
Oh, it's a
Thursday.
Thursday, okay.
Yeah.
Thursday.
Okay.
But
And I think that one works because we're into the summer months, so the planning board does not have something, normally we can't do a Thursday night just because of the planning board, but we don't have but one planning board meeting. Does 7 o'clock still the preferred time, or
sure,
do we want to go earlier? Does 7 work best?
fine with me.
I can do either, whatever
I
works for the.
could go earlier, I could do 7.
Would you rather get home earlier, or would you
I'd be
want-
fine doing 6.
Would 6 o'clock work?
Okay, we can move it to 6 o'clock.
Sure.
Then you go 6 to 8 instead of 7 to 9, that'll get you home a little
Let's
earlier.
go
Yeah,
7
and maybe that
22,
works with some of the
6
group that couldn't later. I don't know if they're
And Jim, you were
putting
already
kids to bed.
yawning, so I think 6 to 8 is better.
Past his bedtime already, so.
Choice.
It's been a long day.
Yeah, so I put it in for 6, assuming you'll still be coordinating with the other people.
Yep,
I
they all
always
send out-
I always consider these things to be determined based on feedback you get from the.
Yeah.
Because
That's
the
why
larger group of people is not here tonight.
We committed to doing June 22nd at this meeting last time, and as soon as we walked out of the meeting, go, oh, that's election day, that won't work, and
Primary day.
that was primary day, so things are open to change, but we'll do the best we can to stick with what we've got. But I think last time we all confirmed June 22nd was the date to
Yeah.
go, and then as soon as we left here, we said, oh,
So
no,
that
that's
was-
primary.
That was primary, okay.
So that was, primary
Was
was
in
here,
here.
so between 5 AM and 9 PM, this room was being used to, for election items, so that kicked us out of here, so that's
Yep.
why we had to change the date, so that's why we're tonight instead of last week, so. Okay, so July 13th, site tour, 5:30, we'll leave from here, we'll confirm that, we'll get the rec van. And then July 22nd, starting at 6 PM, so we'll do 6 to 8 PM on the 22nd, and then we'll get out more sections of the document ahead of that meeting, so we can go through those and keep on rolling.
Tonight, I saw that on the agenda, Doug, you had put committee recommendations based on the COVID-19
Yeah, that was
pandemic.
just, I knew that was going to be sort of an ongoing item, so I wanted to leave that on there. If there was anything you guys thought of based on COVID, that you had any additional or different recommendations, we could work that into the document. I know we had touched on it when we do send it out, we had touched a little bit on it in our business districts and economic opportunities, because COVID has certainly had effect on our businesses and changed a little bit of the business model for some folks. So we want to make sure that if there's anything you guys could think of that we may have missed just based on what's gone on in the past year, that we could try to incorporate that in the document.
Good
Well, I can
example.
certainly say we've seen a lot more folks, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's okay.
We've seen a lot more folks in my neighborhood walking, and there are no sidewalks in my neighborhood. So, I mean, if I were to say something that I think we might want to review from a COVID perspective is making a recommendation to accelerate the sidewalk plan, because quite honestly, a lot more people started walking, and now I'm seeing, even though things have kind of loosened up, those people are still walking every day.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I don't know what you guys think, but that's something I can tell you for sure I've seen in our neighborhood.
Well, I had, because I'm, that kid in school who always did all the homework, so I have this like sort of
Thank God
detailed.
somebody did.
I have this detailed, list all fleshed out, which I'll be happy to, actually, I will write it out a little more coherently, Doug, and send it to you, and then if you want to share it more broadly.
Sure.
But
do that,
I'll-
yeah.
I'll
They have
just-
comments.
I'll just tell you sort of the quick bullet points. What measures did the town implement this time around in terms of lessons learned, what worked well, what did not work ultimately? Secondly, what procedures or protocols should remain in place, that you implemented, as a sort of stopgap measure, but that's like, hey, that turns out that was a really good idea. And are there any of them that specifically support sort of better governance? For example, allowing more access to more people to participate in meetings via Zoom who would never show up in person, things like that.
Actually, that's going to happen.
Good.
That is a good point.
Continue.
Yeah, so,
The other thing that happened business-wise was the town board recognizing that people were not going to go into restaurants. A lot of them were afraid to go into restaurants, and rightfully so. Gave a blanket outdoor dining permit to restaurants that didn't already have one, so they could go in without having to go to the zoning board for a permit to do that during the entire period. Now, that is going to expire, I think, at the end of October, if I'm not mistaken, this year. And those people would now have to go back in, if they really want to continue outdoor dining, they have to go back into the board to get one. Only because it wouldn't be fair for those that had to go through the process of getting it, and then others just walked in and did it without any type of, regulatory process. But that did work out really well. I think it saved a couple of restaurants. Hopefully it did, because that was a definite plus for them, I think, to be able to do that as quickly as they did. So, yeah, I mean, there were things that we did put into effect. There were some things that probably weren't a good thing in the end. I mean, we didn't have the buildings open to anybody, so if you wanted to come here, you really couldn't for a long time. We were here for about a year now. We were here last June, but the public really, I mean, they came in by an appointment-only basis, and they couldn't go through the entire building that they normally could. And now you see there's some security stuff going on here that wasn't here before. Some of it was medical, and some of it is just security now, so. But yeah, good points. We should get those.
so I guess the last just few points were about what I would call migration, or this one point any about migration. We talked about people wanting to move from smaller homes to larger homes and the difficulty with that. But the pandemic also, it's been called sort of in the media, the dress rehearsal for climate change, in terms of there being a migration from areas that are undesirable in other ways, not just because it's small and your kids are doing their work at the kitchen table and you're trying to do your business at the kitchen table, but because it's too hot. I mean, look at what's going on out west or so forth. So have we thought about the impacts of both the pandemic and climate change in terms of our population estimates for growth in Penfield? So I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just saying I think we need to be thinking about that. And we'll have those new census numbers, but maybe our projections for the future are going to be a little different based on factors like that. Something that ties into a topic we discussed a little bit tonight also in terms of affordable housing. There's been this worker shortage especially in lower paying jobs. And some of that's going to shake out, obviously. But with housing prices, whether it's the rental market or residential real estate for purchase, escalating, and the need for workers in jobs that are not well paying, how are we going to kind of come to some reconciliation within our own community so that people can both live and work?
It's been a question for the last 30 years. You're right.
Community.
I don't know how it's going to happen, but I mean, I think the mixed-use district is going to contribute to that.
Yeah.
Because we are starting to get some workforce housing in that district. But these houses now, these suburban tract homes, you cannot build a new single-family home for under $500,000 in Penfield now.
Yeah.
That's what it's come down to.
Yeah.
And of course, the wood shortage and all that other business and the increased cost of materials, that's not helping the process anymore either. I know wood is
And again,
coming
those situations, I think you are correct, those will work themselves out.
They
things
will.
like that.
Wood's coming down now again, too.
But the overall, we had this conversation, you guys recall, we had
Oh,
this
yeah. It's
conversation
been an ongoing
a year and a
issue.
half ago as the group, and we talked about the fact that the cost of the houses at that point, that was before pandemic, anything else, had priced it out of the market for anybody in your age bracket. And, again, if you've got two income earners that are saying it's too expensive to buy a house in Penfield, that's kind of
That's a tough situation.
that is a tough situation. Yeah, again, I'm petrified of the thought of having to sell my house and buy another one. They're going to bury me in the backyard because I'm never selling that house.
I don't blame you, and I'm not either. I'm going to
You can
end
sell
up in
your
that
house,
house
you
till
just
the
got
day I
nowhere to
die.
go.
Yeah, I was moving with you.
Come on over.
But you look at that one subdivision that's up here on Jackson and Plank, I mean, it's starting to be built, but it's being built on the premise that the lots are going to go for $85,000 a piece before you even put a house on it.
Yeah.
You know, even Ryan Holmes doesn't want to pay that much, but I think they may end up doing that. It just goes to show you, this is what's happening to the market now. And the other part of this, too, is a lot of the other towns are not doing development. I mean, you go to Pittsford and Barrington, there's not a lot of development going on in those towns anymore. So they're kind of focusing on this town, they're focusing on, you know, Farmington, places like that where they can get in, but we don't, and we talked about this as well, there's not a lot of sanitary sewer capacity here anymore either. So we may not, going back to your comment a minute ago, we may not see a lot more housing going in because there's no utility to be able to service it.
But we still have to we still have to think about this. I mean, we still have to
I've
sort
been
of,
thinking about it my whole career. I don't know how
Yeah.
to solve the problem. I
Yeah.
just told you, I got a daughter who wants to buy a house here and can't do it.
Yeah.
And she does well. I mean, she's got a good job, and so does her husband, but, you know, they're asking for $100,000 over a price for a house that was probably worth $300,000 maybe, if that. I don't know how you compete with people. And the problem is, all these kids want a house, and their parents are willing to give them money out of their IRAs and everything else to get them there. But I got to tell you, I mean, other than, you know, affordable housing through an apartment complex or something like that, I don't know how you're going to do it. I just don't know how. We even talked to looking at tiny houses. People have been interested
Yeah.
in tiny houses. But the problem with a tiny house is you still got to buy a lot that's worth $85,000 to put it on.
And why would you put a tiny house?
And why would you do it?
Yeah,
Right,
you
it
wouldn't.
makes no sense.
It makes no
It's
business sense to
insane.
put
Yeah,
a tiny house on
the whole movement of tiny houses was that you would have a parcel of land that you could break up in a reasonable way.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if the plot of land is worth 3 times the value of the tiny house, you're going to have a hell of a time getting anybody to.
So, and if you have a tiny house, you want a tiny lot, right? So what do you need for a tiny lot? You need a sanitary sewer.
Yep.
We don't have any.
Yep.
That's the problem.
And most of those are built, as I've seen, the ones I've seen that seem to be doing well in other areas, it's a small community of tiny houses. There'll be 25 tiny houses in their little circles,
Right.
and there's general central areas. And so it's meant to be a microcosm community
with shared
altogether.
amenities.
Yeah.
But you know, if you have to run sanitary sewers to service 25 tiny houses, those tiny houses are going to be astronomical
Now
in
you're
price
going to
when
have
they get to them.
the lot development costs.
You got to
are
run
gonna be
water to them,
$100,000.
sanitary, storm, utilities, gas, electric. By the time you get done doing that, you might as well build on a Ryan Home project. It's just, it just doesn't work out. It's all
There's-
upside down
The
now.
economics don't work.
It's all
work out
upside down.
We've
because
had
of
a
the
couple people
cost to do the
propose
lot
it, but
development.
economics always gets in the way.
Well, so
Yep, no,
speaking
for
of
sure.
being upside down, that's what leads me just to my last point on this, and this ties into this housing thing, that, you know, given what has been a pretty sudden, for Penfield anyway, a pretty sudden escalation in the prices of homes here. You know, this was, the whole Rochester area is typically known for being very stable in
Right.
terms of its residential
Right.
housing prices. And we've seen this, you know, this dramatic ratcheting up of prices. I think if we want to make sure that we don't have this sudden sort of outflow of people from the community, not because they think they can make a buck on the house, that's their
Right.
prerogative,
Right.
but because taxes escalate radically as well. We have to find, there has to be some way, and again, I know it's not the purpose of this committee, but I think it's important for the color of the community, that there is some sort of an insulating factor so that folks who have lived here for a long time that want to remain and stay in their houses don't see a sudden tripling of their property taxes.
Yeah, I don't think you'll see that. We're going to do a reval next year. They were going to do it before COVID struck, and then they said, there's just no way we can do this to people.
Yeah.
But they are going to do a reval next year.
Well, and that's a requirement of the state. It's not just the
Yeah,
town
I
of
mean,
Penfield looking
we're
to
required by
capitalize
law
on
to
it.
do it.
Yeah.
So, and it's not that we want to go
So
out and make
are you
enemies.
talking about about recommending a cap on, and that becomes a referendum that's done politically, that's a whole other.
Yeah. I think what you're really thinking about, those people like you and I that have been in our houses for a long, long time now, all of a sudden seeing, I don't think you're going to see that. I think what's going to happen is a lot of the properties, though, that are being sold at market value now, whether $100,000 over what the real value of the property is, I think the assessor takes that into consideration. It's not just, you paid $400,000, now we're going to hammer you for $400,000. It doesn't work that way, and it didn't work that way, if you remember years ago when Amico was building those houses.
Right. It didn't work
And he
that
was,
way with that.
he was telling you they were worth way more than they were. Our assessors did not do that. They said, no, that house is really worth this much, not that much, and they kept it where it was, and thank God they did.
Thank God they
because a
did.
lot of those houses went into foreclosure, and at least they were foreclosed at what they're really valued at, not something that was off the wall crazy. So they do take that into consideration, but still, I mean, you know, you're building new houses that are valued at $500,000, $600,000 now, and they're right around the corner from you and I, as a matter of fact, on Creek Street, but that's a different market, I think, than what we would have to experience for that.
Yeah, because I think that kind of goes to the other piece of it, that if somebody comes in, like my new neighbors on one side, who I can't fathom how the house is worth $200,000 more than it was last year at this time, and a young couple came in and bought it. How they're paying that mortgage now, I don't know, but if their taxes doubled, they would be underwater, and, you know,
Right.
and I'm afraid some of them are going to be underwater just on the
I
mortgages.
think some of them will be because they just
in
overextended
any
themselves.
case.
You know, it's nice to live in a certain area that you want to live in, but you got to be able to afford to do it, you know? You can't just, that's why a lot of times people in Penfield do things that are illegal because that's the only way they can live here. You know, they're running businesses out of their houses that they shouldn't be running, or they're doing something stupid like auto repair. They're doing it because they want to live on that property, but, you know, you're not doing it legally. You're just there. And it's to a point where how far can you go before you can't stay there because you're going to get caught doing it illegally at some point in time, and you got to stop doing it. So you're right, it's a tough situation. It's been tough for a long, long time. It'll be interesting to see how a lot of these kids survive this with what they're putting into these properties. It's one thing to buy the house, it's another thing to be able to pay the taxes on it every year.
Well, yeah, and then the question becomes, where I think this is all going, is not only the possibility that the assessment was suddenly a $200,000 house is now assessed at $400,000, but worse yet, they purchased a house for $400,000 that in 2 years is now only worth $200,000. We all lived this in 2005 or 6. I don't know about you guys, but I sold my house in Maryland and came up here and paid full sticker for the house I live in now. Now, it's okay, and I love the house, but I guarantee you that house a year earlier was probably quite a percentage less than that.
Right.
I bought at the height of a market, so I know.
You're right, you're right. And the other thing, too, is a lot of these kids are buying these houses without any inspections. So, of course, they're already paying $60,000 more than the house is worth, not knowing that the house needs a new roof, a new water heater, a new furnace, a
Or
new
if they
this,
got
a new that.
foundation issues or drainage problems, and
I mean, you know. it's
Or
just-
like the
it's
house in the
insane.
back of our neighborhood that was sliding down the hill.
Yeah, a good example. What do you
Yeah.
have to spend to keep that from happening, you know?
Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that people were making purchases and not having inspections. That's
Oh.
that's
that's
crazy for me.
More than not, more than not, more than not.
Yeah.
What they're doing now is they're taking their inspector in when they do the half-hour walkthrough, just to see it, to see if they can find something that's wrong that they really got to deal with. But in a half an hour, you can't do that. You got to really do an
Well,
inspection
no,
on the house.
you're right. I mean, the inspector we hired was there for 2 hours,
Right.
and fine-tooth comb, yeah.
But you're only allowed in the houses now for a half an hour to look at them, and that's it. And then you make your bid, and then 3 or 4 days later, they open the bid, and whoever was the highest, they win the prize. It's really insane as to what's happening now. You know, you talk to realtors, and then you say, oh, that's got to be a great deal for you with all this going on. They say, it really isn't, because what's happening is you have 3 or 4 clients that you're trying to find a house for. You find the perfect house for them. They put the bid in, and they lose it every time because somebody else is taking the bid. So you're calling your clients all the time saying, I'm sorry, you didn't get the bid, you know? So it's not good for them either at this point in time.
They're losing to non-local buyers.
Yeah, it's tough. Well,
These are all things they didn't teach him in realty school, I'm sure.
They didn't teach any of us this stuff. This is a whole new world.
Well, guys, thanks again for putting this together.
Thank you.
This
Thanks
is-
for coming.
Yeah,
We
thanks for
really
coming.
appreciate the fact that you did come and get your comments, and we'll incorporate them into the document, and we'll go from there.
I'll follow up with an email later with the dates and the times for you guys, and I'll include the rest of the committee in on that.
And you'll
I'll
let
send
us
another
know
one.
about what, kind of future state, some of the other groups we want to talk to and whatnot. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So with no other comments, we'll conclude this meeting at 9:02 PM. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.
Have a safe trip home.